Good morning, Dulles. I'm Anike. I am so happy to host you this morning. If you're joining us online, we are so excited you are here and are part of our church family. If you're here today at Light Ridge, welcome. On August 29th, we have something exciting we want to invite you to. Our church will be doing a 5K to raise awareness for an amazing organization, Hope to Walk. Hope to Walk provides prosthetics to those that do not have access to them, and we love supporting them. We will be walking in the Willisford community starting at Light Ridge High School. So join us on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. on the Light Ridge track. We will all walk together rather than doing our usual church gathering. Invite friends and family to join us. You can learn more on the Dulles app. Again, I love that you all are part of our church family. Happy Sunday.
College students at Dulles, we are for you. We are not going anywhere. If you need anything from us, and we mean it, we've been talking about this as a staff team. We've been talking about it as a larger group of team leaders when the conversation comes up. If you guys need anything, please lean into your church family. We know it's exciting and it's like an adventure to be headed off to school or back to school. We totally get that, but we also know that being a student can be a challenge, and sometimes we find ourselves in a crisis of faith when we're at college. Please don't be afraid to reach out, to text, to call if you need anything at all. We are cheering for you. We're proud of you. We can't wait to hear how this semester's going, and we can't wait to have you back with us here in a couple of months during fall break or at Thanksgiving. We love you guys so much. Okay, Mackenzie and I during COVID watched all the Marvel movies, all of them in timeline order. I know that was kind of a thing that happened during the pandemic. A lot of people did that, probably millions of people did it. And we just recently finished the Loki series, the new television series about Loki. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I will say this. In the first 10 minutes of episode 1 of Loki, we learn that Loki that we're seeing and that is in this series is actually a variant. He's a variant of himself. He's a variant of the original actual Loki. And he's a version, we learn. He's a version that should never have existed. And so you know the way I think, hearing stories or reading stories, I'm always looking for the metaphor about real life or truth. And so during this Loki series, seeing this whole idea of a variant emerge, someone who's a variant of themselves, and a variant that should never ever have started or never existed, it got me thinking very much about a theme that we have been hitting on here for the last couple of years that I've been hearing from many of you has been really helpful to you. And that is about how the church, throughout church history, over the last 100 years, certainly in our lifetime, the Western church, I'm talking about the larger church, the global church, particularly in the West, the church can become a variant of what it was supposed to be, of its original self. A lot of people, logically, it's logical, think that when they see the church acting hypocritically or full of gossip or judgmental, people in the church judgmental about others, that somehow is representing Jesus. Either Jesus isn't consistent with his own values, or God is very judgmental of the world and other people. And so people are leaving the church in record number. We've known this for about 60 years. It's really been tracked for the last 50 to 60 years. And with every decade, the American church, the Western church, is getting smaller. And when surveyed, why people are identifying as a nun, N-O-N-E, having no affiliation, no religious affiliation, it always inevitably has something to do with the church is just not very appealing. I hope the church isn't actually representing Jesus because I don't want to be a part of following that kind of God or that version of Jesus. And so we've been talking here the last couple of years a lot, often about how the church in many cases has become a variant of what it was supposed to be. And this usually is because people in the church or church leaders struggle from a sense of control or losing control, or struggle with fear. Almost always, when churches become some version that isn't Jesus, they don't look like Jesus, they don't sound like Jesus, and they don't behave like Jesus, it's because of control or fear. And the worst kind of experience someone can have, with all the bad experiences in churches that you and I've had and that much of society has had, the very worst experience that anyone can have is if they're in a church and the people of that church, or some group in that church, or maybe even a church leader, is fearful of losing control. If they're actually struggling with both fear and control, and they're afraid of losing control, all kinds of confusion can happen, and manipulation and hurt. And so we are committed here. We never claim to be a perfect church. We're not trying to be a perfect church, but we are intentional about following the way of Jesus, emulating the heart of Jesus, looking and sounding like the message of Jesus. Now, when churches become variants of themselves, when they become this version that should have never existed, several things can emerge. And I'm just going to give you several examples. 100 years ago, the church was very rule-centric. Churches all over America were really aligned with many, many, many rules. They were strict, and we still have this today. Rules like women had to wear dresses that went all the way down to cover their ankles. And that was from fear. Church leaders were fearful that the people of their church might give in to lust or temptation. And so they made the rule. We're going to cover all skin so that our people just won't struggle or lust or be tempted. And it's just ridiculous. Another rule-centric example is no alcohol. It's crazy today how the church is perceived as a place that's like dry or no alcohol because alcohol is a sin, when in Europe hundreds of years ago, churches were the winemakers. They were the beer masters. Monasteries and monks and pastors and priests were responsible for some of the best wine and some of the best beer. Well, then a few hundred years ago, the holiness movement happened. That's what it was called when churches were fearful that people would get drunk or they'd lose control of the people. And so they enacted this rule, no more alcohol. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, Jesus' very first miracle was turning water into wine, providing alcohol at a wedding feast. And we won't get into the symbolism there. It was really important. This actually happened in a town called Cana. And Jesus was symbolically speaking of what eternity would be like with the Father, with God. It's going to be a feast. He also was symbolically foreshadowing the wine that he would share at the Last Supper before his death. It's amazing that wine is actually a part of Jesus' life in the New Testament, and yet the church, out of fear and control, could end up making the rule no alcohol. So when churches become variants or versions of itself that should have never existed, which looks nothing like Jesus or sounds like him, it can be very rule-centric. Another example of what happens when the church becomes a variant is what Andy's been talking about. We've been led by Andy in this series about what faith really looks like. What does faith really mean? And Andy so well explained that the church in recent centuries has adopted this kind of easier path to faith, which is believe in me. The church has been communicating that Jesus' primary message was believe in me, when actually it was the harder message of follow me. Actually live out my character, live out my heart for others. Here's the third example I want to give you that relates to our message today. And that is that when churches become a variant of who Jesus actually is, what his heart actually is, what his mission and focus and movement in this world actually is, a variant of that became, in the last 100 years, maybe you could go back even 400 years, 450 years, this warped sense of worship or devotion to God that we are so devoted to you, God, we're going to stand against things that we don't like or things that aren't very church-like. And so the church adopted this sort of protest ideology or heart where we're going to protest certain groups of people, or we're going to call out certain behavior in society, or we're going to stand against certain political views, or actually stand against political parties. And it's just ludicrous when Jesus was never about standing against people in society or our neighbors or even belief systems. The only group that Jesus ever stood against were the religious leaders who were wrongly telling the people that the way to God was through all kinds of works and rules, when Jesus came to say, no, it's about my love. My love is what makes you right with God. Jesus was for broken people and hurting people and irreligious people. And so this leads us to our third value. And we're in this series called Valuable. We're talking about what's most valuable here to us at Dulles. We're talking about our core values. And remember, a core value is not a goal. A core value isn't something that you'd like to become someday or achieve someday. It's not an aspiration. A core value actually defines who you are, like in your character, and it specifically defines how you behave. Now, we aren't claiming that we've perfected these values and that we've got them all figured out. What we're saying here at Dulles is these values are so important to us because we believe they emulate Jesus. And so we are committed to living them out as best as we can, reminding one another how important these values are, and living them authentically to one another and in front of one another and to the world. And so this third value is that we want to be for. It's the word for. And what we mean by this, what we mean by the hashtag for Dulles that we've been using a lot here in the last couple of years is hashtag for Dulles simply means we want to be known by what we're for. Now there's one specific kind of person that Jesus tells us we can actually live out. It's an easy step. It's kind of an easy, practical way to start living as people who are for rather than against. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But if you struggle to accept that God is for us and he came to be for us and that the church is supposed to be for the people in our neighborhoods, regardless of what they believe, regardless of how they vote, regardless of how they pray, that we, followers of Jesus, are supposed to be for the schools in our areas and the businesses, and the neighbors in our street. If you're actually struggling with that because of the way you grew up in church or the paradigm that you've seen church live out, because of the variants that you've seen the church be, I just want to tell you that the New Testament consistently describes the actual original version of what the church was supposed to be. Paul tells us that while we were lost and broken in our own selfishness, Jesus came for us. He came to rescue us. He came to give up his life for us. The word that Paul uses is sin. While we were still sinners. Now, sinner doesn't mean you were born an awful person. Sin means our natural broken state as humans, that humanity is broken by selfishness, that we live to elevate ourselves and elevate our own selfish agendas or interests rather than centering our lives around God's plan for us. And that's called sin. And Paul says, while we were still lost and broken in our sin, Jesus came for us. All right, so let's look at what Jesus says himself. John 3:16, of course, is the most famous verse in the Bible. What's sad about it is we often stop at the end of John 3:16 and don't read John 3:17. John 3:17, Jesus says, "For I didn't come to condemn the world, I came to rescue the world." It's remarkable that the heart of Jesus consistently was for us. Now, if you want to take a step or begin movement toward this direction of living for, being part of a church that's actually for the world, for people in culture and society, not protesting or not telling people that they're wrong or that they're sinning or they're somehow displeasing God. That's not our job. That was never the job of the church. Jesus tells us that every person is broken and that when we submit to him, when we start leaning into him, he will shape us and reshape us back into the character that was always designed for us. That's not the job of the church to say out to society. Never. That was never, ever our job. Our job is to love. Period. That's what Jesus said. That's his command. He came with one rule. Churches out of fear and control have tried to become rule-centric, where we make all these rules to keep people from sinning. Jesus said, I've come with one rule, one law. He specifically said, I've come with one law for you, those who follow me, and that is that you would love and grow in love the way I love, which is laying down your life and being selfless for others and living out my love. And that takes a lifetime. That takes the rest of our lives, and we're going to be learning that in eternity, to love the way Jesus loves. Jesus' command for you and me in the church is that we would love others. We would love one another and love others. And so at Dulles, central to our belief system and central to our view of Scripture and our relationship with God and our view of the world is that we are to be for the people around us, cheering for them, showing up to serve them, to love on them, giving up our time for others. Okay, so there's many places we could look here at specific places where Jesus unpacks this for us. The Good Samaritan. The story of the Good Samaritan is Jesus' answer to the question, well, who is my neighbor? Jesus, you said that we are supposed to love God with all of our hearts, minds, souls, and strength, and we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, the Pharisees, the arrogant religious leaders, were trying to justify themselves in not having to love certain kinds of people, and they asked him, well, who then is our neighbor? Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. You can find that story in the book of Luke. We're not going to read it today. I want to read today, out of all the examples we could look at, I want to look at Matthew 25. This is a powerful telling of God's heart and God's worldview and the way his kingdom works, the way the time and space and character and intent and movement of God's kingdom is revealed here in large part in Matthew 25. Now, Jesus has just given this big story. It's a parable about how we're supposed to use the gifts that God gives us. And there's one guy in the story who buries his talent. He buries his gift from God out of fear. It's out of selfishness and fear. And so Jesus is making a larger point here. And I want to focus here just in our last few minutes together on the ending of the story where Jesus surprises everybody with this dramatic conclusion to the parable of the talents. So Jesus here is the king. He's referring to himself as the king. And he says in Matthew 25:34, then the king will say to those on his right, those who were welcomed to eternity and to spend eternity creating, just like the Garden of Eden. Remember, when people were created, when human beings were created, we were creating. Before we broke the world in selfishness, we were creating. We were creating life. Because you and I, humans, were made in the image of God, in the image of the Creator. And so we're going to be creating again in eternity. The king will say to those who he's inviting into eternity, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now, this is what everybody wants. Everybody wants the peace of mind of thinking, oh, I'm going to spend eternity in a really good place and in God's love and God's goodness, and I'm not going to be in a bad place. I mean, that's something that's a topic that comes up in conversation with me so much. So Jesus here is describing in detail one of the major factors in the lives of the people who he invites into eternity with him. And now remember, it's also important to say that Jesus doesn't describe eternity as little clouds or floating little babies with harps and all this weird stuff, this imagery that we've developed. Jesus' description of heaven is a feast. Eternity, while we're creating for God and while we're celebrating community and with all the laughter, We're going to be feasting, and that's the primary picture that Jesus gives us of what life is like with God the Father in eternity. So he's inviting this group of people to spend eternity with him, and then we find out who exactly he's offering the invitation to. Verse 35, "For I was hungry, and you, those of you here on my right, those who I'm inviting to spend eternity with me, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." Then the righteous, those who are right in God's eyes, will say, well, they're asking, well, how are we right? What makes us right? Their question is, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we ever, Jesus, see you thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes to clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you? And the King, Jesus himself, will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you were actually doing for me." It's amazing when you think that Jesus came into this world and experienced the pain and the hurt that we experience. We don't think of Jesus as hungry, but we know that Jesus was homeless. He actually had no place to lay his head. On a number of occasions, there was no place for Jesus to sleep. When he was born, there was no place for him, even as a baby, for his birth. There was no room for him in the inn. We think, well, Jesus was never in prison. Jesus was arrested after the Last Supper. Jesus was wrongly arrested and jailed, and then, of course, the next day crucified. I mean, Jesus is expressing here this collision of a broken world where humanity experiences pain and hurts and disappointment and crushing sorrow at times, and the intent of God's kingdom, that people would be whole and would be offered healing and encouragement. And so that collision is happening here, where a broken world is being introduced to the healing and hope and wholeness of God, and it comes by way of you and me. It comes by way of his followers. Jesus is saying he could wave a magic wand and make the world whole, and he will ultimately finish that process someday. We know, the New Testament clearly says that Jesus will come and finish the work of the church. But right now, his intent is that his church, his followers, would live out his heart, his character, his voice, his movement in this world. And so the true original version of the church is imperfect people with regrets and mistakes from our past, people with our own hurts, are being made whole and being given hope by Jesus in such a way where we turn and offer the same to others. So there's all kinds of people and groups and companies and schools that we could be for, and we want to be known in the Dulles area and in our world for being for our neighbors and those all around us, of course. And we will be for our schools this year, and we will be for our college students, and we will be for area businesses, in particular, who Jesus calls us to be for are those especially who hurt or need encouragement, who are struggling in some way. And so I'm going to just give you some practicals here. Practical ways where you can lean in with your church family to being for, as we live out this idea of being for Dulles. And we say for Dulles as a hashtag, but we're really for our world. And this extends beyond. I'm going to give you a couple examples that are outside of the Dulles area. So wherever you're watching from, if you're watching from around the country or even internationally, we have folks that watch from different countries. These can pertain to you. Some of these specific examples can certainly pertain to you wherever you are. Okay, first of all, here in the Dulles area, just a couple weeks, we have this 5K walk. We're going to spend Sunday morning walking just over 3 miles. And if you don't make it the whole 3 miles, that's not the point. It doesn't matter. We're just going to have fun together and hang out together. And we're doing this to remind ourselves and some of our friends that we invite to join us about the organization here in Virginia called Hope to Walk. You'll hear more details about this here in the coming 12, 13, 14 days. We're going to meet at Light Ridge High School. We're going to walk for a little while. We're going to celebrate this idea of being for under-resourced peoples, particularly in the third world, who suffer from amputations because of diabetes. Diabetes is very high in the third world, and many people end up being amputees because of this. And Hope to Walk is just so beautifully helping solve a very real problem in many places in the world. So walk with us. We're going to be outside. If you haven't rejoined us yet at Light Ridge on Sunday mornings, we understand that's okay. Even though we're being careful at Light Ridge and we're really trying to be mindful of distance and vaccinations and those things, this is an outdoor event. Come join us on Sunday morning, August 29th at Light Ridge for the 5K. Okay, here's another example. We are committed to some area partners. The Dulles South Food Pantry and the Dulles South Neighborhood Closet are providing much needed clothing and food to many neighbors in the Dulles area who need help. We show up and serve, and sometimes we spend all day and sometimes we spend an hour or two folding clothes or unpacking or packing into boxes clothing for big shopping days. These are events that we're going to be pouring into again this fall. So express interest. If you want to be on the list, you want to be part of one of those food distribution days or clothing days, let us know. Here's another example. Joshua Simonet, who we all know and love, who's launching amazing projects in Baltimore and the new church that he's going to be leading in Baltimore. We have some opportunities coming up where we can actually go to Baltimore and be hands-on in some of these projects. Some of you need to join me and join some of our leadership team to go to Baltimore and just give part of a day, part of a Saturday, loving on people who really need help and encouragement. Here's another example. North Point just notified me about a month ago about a missions opportunity in Costa Rica. I've never been to Costa Rica. There's a church there. It's a North Point partner church. I've not met the pastor yet, but they have opened what they call the Hope Center for refugees. Many refugees from around the world are actually arriving in Costa Rica, and this Hope Center is providing much needed items and educational supplies and even educational opportunities for children of refugees. And we've been asked to consider maybe going on a trip or maybe even considering a partnership to help these refugee families in Costa Rica. Here's another example. People who live on your street, people who you work with, who you tend to just kind of think of as co-workers, struggle from time to time or are in relational difficulty or financial difficulty. We have a CARES team here at Dulles that Alton Bryant leads. You may want to just join the prayer team where you say, hey, I want to commit daily or every week to praying for some of the needs in our church and in our community. There are a lot of opportunities for you to step into this space of being for Dulles or for our world or for the people who live on your street, for people who are struggling and need encouragement. So I'm just asking all of you, when it comes to financial giving, we tell you, hey, if you're new here, if you're still just, kind of feeling the lay of the land here at Dulles, leave your wallets at home, we say. Giving is really for those who've committed to this being their church home. But what we're talking about today is for everybody. This could be your first Sunday with us. If this is the first time you've joined us, why not? I challenge you, man, just join us in living for others as we live out the way of Jesus, as we live out the authentic, true version of who Jesus is and what he's called his church to be. God, may we, perfection is not the goal. We're not trying to be something that we're not. We're trying to live out you alive in us. So may we be for our neighbors, and especially for those who hurt and those who struggle and those who need an encouraging friend. May we give up time on weekends and evenings to be for our neighbors, and for those around us. I love you, Dulles Church. I love being part of this church with you. You make me proud. I'll see you online and in our various groups and events coming up this week and in the weeks ahead. I love you so much.